Paul, thank you very much for popping by Sentinel Data Centers.
Sure.
So, what are you showing at the show over the next couple of days?
Well, we're a enterprise co-location company, a wholesale co-location, where we provide large demised premises for tenants, so it's a data center within a data center. Our typical deployment is a tier 3 plus infrastructure, which provides 5 nines uptime availability. Our SLAs are 100%, but if you look at the design, it's a 5 nines design. Recently, we've realized that there's a need in the marketplace for lower tier level infrastructure. Not every company requires a tier 2, tier 3, or tier 4 data center for their IT kit. And in our 2 data centers currently in New Jersey, Somerset, New Jersey, and in Durham, North Carolina, we have built and are building medium voltage transmission quality services into the data centers. And why that's important is that transmission power, which is medium voltage, has a much higher reliability than your typical distribution voltage, which is 13.2 or 26 kilovolts. In New Jersey, it's 69 kilovolts kV, and in North Carolina, it's 100 kilovolts. And the reason why that's important, as I said, the reliability of that service is much higher than distribution voltage. So the typical anomalies that you would see on the distribution lines are not apparent on the transmission lines. So the quality of power is much, much better. So for those companies who have some portion of their IT kit that could possibly withstand a momentary outage, which is very, very infrequent, and we're talking about 5 years or more, meaning the frequency of an event. The voltage regulation typically is well within what was called the CBEMA curve, which is now the ITIC curve, such that you don't need UPSs to condition power. So what we would propose is for those organizations that could deal with a possible outage once every 5 years, or even greater than that, that we would provide utility grade power at transmission voltage, step down without UPSs, but with the requisite cooling and generator backup that gives you a very high reliability without all the infrastructure cost. Obviously, we can sell that at a much more reasonable price because you're doing away with a certain amount of infrastructure. So that's what we're trying here today to convey to potential customers.
And how big is that? Is that market? I presume the market is growing.
Well, I think there's been a realization in the marketplace that there isn't a one-size-fits-all from a data center design.
Yeah.
Typically, I came, before being with Sentinel, I was with the New York Stock Exchange. In our old data centers, development systems, test systems, and online trading systems all got the same infrastructure. When you think about it rationally, that doesn't make any sense, because test and development don't require that type of redundancy and reliability. You're wasting an awful lot of money in infrastructure and power. So I think there's been a significant realization in the marketplace that you can segregate these systems and give a multi-tiered level of infrastructure deployment to give you your high sensitivity equipment, a tier 3 or a tier 4 infrastructure, and your lower sensitivity, a tier 1 or 2. And that's what we're trying to do. And we can provide that type of deployment in both of our data centers.
How much resistance are you coming up with that suggestion? Because I would imagine some of the more dyed-in-the-wool data center managers are going to say, hey, no, this is what we always had. How do you get across that objection?
Yeah, it's a cultural change.
Yeah,
it's going to take time.
Yeah.
Think about how companies were resistant to move from an enterprise data center to a co-location data center.
Yeah.
Now it's the norm. There are more companies going to co-location than building their own. I think it's identifying them, the pros and cons, and there are some cons. Obviously, if you're on a transmission grid that has problems, that's not going to sell too well. The grids that we are on are very, very stable, very reliable. I think it's an education process just like anything else, socializing the concept and getting them to feel comfortable with it. It will take time. It's not going to happen overnight.
So are there any trends in solar that you can give us some insight into? Anything you're seeing in the last period, anything you're seeing at the show? Is there anything anyone said to you today that's given you an insight into the company?
Well, energy efficiency is still number one issue. Assuming that you can provide the required reliability and redundancy. There really hasn't been a silver bullet, either electrically or mechanically. A lot of the same principles are continued to be used. I think more containment methodologies in the data centers. Once again, we come across tenants who seem to be resistant to it, but when we explain the engineering principles behind it, they understand and they get on board. Once again, I really believe it has more to do with education than anything else. And there's still an awful lot of people out there that don't avail themselves to the opportunities, both from vendors and from the industry in general, to learn more about best practices in constructing and operating data centers.
Yeah. And do you think that's going to come from from sea level, or is it a combination of sea level and the change at the bottom?
I think it's both. I think it has to start at the top and work its way down, and then at the grassroots level with the operating staff wanting to be more professional. In this business, look, I can harken back quite a few years ago where the professionalism of the people who ran data centers was questionable. Today that won't work. Data centers are much too important to businesses today. You can't operate a business. Even email systems today are critical for business operation.
Well, you've been here a few times before.
I have.
I understand. So we can sit here again next year and compare notes about.
Be pleased to.
There won't be St. Patrick's Day, and
hopefully not.
Nobody will have hangovers then.
Yeah, exactly.